and welcome to another edition of AUHSD Future Talks. I'm your host, Michael Matsuda, the superintendent of the Anaheim Union High School District. And as our 7,000 plus podcast listeners know, this is all about the future of education for our young people who are living and thriving in a very volatile and uncertain world. And because they're thriving is due to amazing partnerships that AUHSD has with a program that many of us have heard of called Gear Up, but it's overseen by a program called NCCEP, National Council for Community and Education Partnerships. And today we're very lucky to have the Vice President of Programs, Betty Paugh Ortiz. Betty, welcome to our little show.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Matsuda. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, you have quite a lived experience, and I think that's really important to share with our listeners. We always start with who you are and how did you get there, because so many of our young people are looking for role models, both with people of color and women of color in particular. So Betty, tell us a little bit about your story.
Thank you. So I'll begin with my name, because I am the product of a bicultural household where my father, Bernard Paugh, and Maria Ortiz have been married 64 years. And so I'm very happy that my West Virginian dad made it, thanks to the U.S. Navy, to Puerto Rico. And I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. We come from very humble roots, and my parents supplemented their income by producing in our farm all kinds of different goods. But specifically, we did very well with plantains and watermelons. So from a very young age, I started working in the farm, and I got to pick the tomatoes and I got to feed the chickens. Don't ask me whether I like that task, because the roosters were not my friends. But absolutely loved growing up in my small community of Ceiba, Puerto Rico. And I'm the youngest of 4 in my family. And education was an absolute priority. So I went to the public school in Puerto Rico, and I was able to learn English thanks to my father. So I had that advantage locally to be able to be bilingual. So yes, I'll pause there.
Thank you, Betty. I think that Gear Up, could you share a little bit about Gear Up and how you became affiliated with that? I know you have an extensive resume. You also work with the National Education Association as well, but you were Director of Maternal and Child Health at the National Council of La Raza. Very active advocate in social justice. So how did you end up professionally as the Vice President?
It's been a journey, Superintendent Matsuda, because I didn't even know growing up in Puerto Rico that there was this third sector. I thought that you either went for profit, worked in education, or became a lawyer, right? My universe of professions was very limited. And when I went to American University, I started discovering that there were other paths that I could embark on. And I accidentally stumbled through my advocacy work in undergrad upon this third sector, the nonprofit sector. And in many communities, we talk about it as public service, but not to be confused with public service through a government agency or entity. So it was Unidos US, that was then called the National Council of La Raza, where I learned that there was this other space in which I could work and be a productive member of society, but also be able to give back. And so I began that process of learning about this space, and I became completely in love with it. It was just so exciting to be in this new workspace that was vibrant and that we often forget that the nonprofit sector covers everything from a higher ed institution to a hospital to a community-based organization. And in between, there's so much more. When I began my career, I was prioritizing public health because I thought that was the most critical piece for my community as a Latina. I valued that we needed to have more access and have more information. And I began in that space, worked for quite a few years, and at that moment, I decided it was time to go to get a master's degree. And when I went to DePaul University in Chicago, that's when I had this epiphany. A lot was happening in my community back home. The United States Navy had missed their target and killed a civilian, and we began a very active process of forcing the Navy to stop the bombing in the island of Vieques in Puerto Rico. Again, critically important. Health was critically important because we have such a high incidence of cancer among children in the island of Vieques. At the same time, I began realizing that education was going to be the pathway. If I could influence and be in any way a small part of educating the broader community. And as I identify as a Latina, and that is who I am, I also have family in Appalachia. I also have my family in West Virginia, and they too were experiencing very similar issues, again, with health and education. And I began this process of exploring how could I contribute in the education space. I worked at the Center for Latino Research at DePaul University, and that led me down this path of understanding higher ed and understanding these systems. And from there, when I returned to DC in 2001, after realizing that as much as I love the Windy City, it is not for me. You need a different type of skin to be able to tolerate those winters. And I returned to DC. And it was at that point that through my work at that moment with the University of Puerto Rico, representing them out of DC, that I met Dr. Margarita Benitez. And Dr. Benitez is considered one of the godmothers, if you will, of Gear Up. She was at the Clinton administration when Gear Up was established, and she's actually the link to my affiliation, not just with Gear Up, but also with our dear friend, Alex Cho. She was his boss at the time at the U.S. Department of Education when he was a program officer. And so it was she that brought me into the fold and started explaining not just Gear Up, but the broader college access and success space. And the more I learned about it, I completely knew I had found my home. And it was in 2004 that the founding president of NCCEP, Dr. Hector Garza, reached out to me about a position they had available at NCCEP. And I immediately started working. I think literally I ended the interview, which was a lunch, and I already had my notebook and pen out with all the tasks and ideas that we had discussed. And so I worked at NCCEP for a little bit over 5 years, my first stint at NCCEP. But once you are working in the Gear Up space, you just cannot leave. As you well know, Superintendent Matsuda, we're impacting over 500,000 students throughout the United States. And the program is grounded in all of the core pieces that we know we need to be able to help our families succeed. And so especially the aspect of family engagement, that is one of the core principles for Gear Up. And as you well know, there's so much work that we need to do, but that Gear Up is successful at doing in that space. So when Bridget Sadu and Alex Cho asked me to turn NCCEP, I said yes.
It's definitely the shoe that fits, Betty. So for our audience, could you remind us What is Gear Up and what is its purpose?
So Gear Up is a federally funded program. The acronym stands for Gaining Early Awareness and Readiness for Undergraduate Programs. It was established by the Clinton administration as his legacy program in his second term. And the program is a little bit different from other federal programs that support students and families access and success in post-secondary education, because not only is it highly competitive to obtain such funding, but it is also a program that serves students beginning in the seventh grade, or no later, than the seventh grade, and follows the student all the way through their first year of college or post-secondary education. And so these services encompass not just the direct academic enrichment opportunities for the student, but it's also about the professional development and support systems for the educators that are assisting the students. And then there's this unique piece that is the family engagement. Very few programs have that, primary focus of how do you really consider community development, because it goes beyond just serving the one student, the one teacher, the one counselor, but to think about that entire community and how do we make sure that families maximize the students' education, but also how do they understand how to support their student. And when I'm saying families, I also mean caregivers. We have many students that are supported by aunts, godparents, grandparents. There's the gamut. So how do we think of that family unit of whoever is that caring adult that is there for the student?
Your lived experience is one as a Latina who coming from bilingual and also marginalized poverty, relating to, now helping to lead a major organization with 500,000 students and something like 47 states and all these partnerships out there. How does an organization create this culture of identity affirmation? Because so many of our kids now our parents are feeling othered out there, right? They're feeling like the other, they're part of the problem. If we only got rid of them, we can move forward. How do you navigate that as a leader? And I'm sure you hear a lot from the field concerns about, what do we do to affirm people's identity and their lived experiences and create a more inclusive school culture?
Yes. Well, I can start because it is a big question, Superintendent Matsuda. We've got what NCCEP is able to contribute as a national nonprofit, and then the role that we intend to have in supporting Gear Up programs throughout the country. And so we'll start home. We'll start with ourselves. We are a mighty team of 15 people, and we are very intentional about recruiting and hiring so that we represent the communities that we serve. And we are very supportive of that diversity in our home, right? And although we're based in DC, we have colleagues that work throughout the United States, and we have a very talented but also very eclectic group, from life experiences to backgrounds, and it is all celebrated and supported. When it comes to our communities, I can give you the example of every year, NCCEP at our annual conference, we bring together 150 students from that huge pool of over 500,000 students across the country. These students are selected by their grants. And as you said earlier, we're talking about grants that can be as far as, the border of Texas and Mexico, or as urban as the Bronx Institute at Lehman College. And they're the ones that identify the students that will participate. When they are all together, they are a group of students that have not met, that are high school students that have very different experiences. And our intention is to make absolutely everyone feel that not only are they valued, but respected. And in doing that, what we do, every student must come with a chaperone. And if the chaperone is a caregiver, whether it is a parent, a sibling, or a grandparent, we offer as well professional development and opportunities for those caring adults to come together in what we call the Family Leadership Institute, which we intentionally host in both English and Spanish. We offer simultaneous translations so that everybody can feel welcome. And what's really exciting, Superintendent Matsuda, is that every year we embark in this project. And when I get there, I admit there's some butterflies that I'm feeling. I am concerned because the diversity is so rich. And when you get in the room and you see, typically it's between 90 to 120 adults that are there in support of those students. And all of a sudden, through the activities, the icebreakers, and grounding everyone on the values of Gear Up, the values of supporting all students to help them succeed, then you start seeing that person that came from Appalachia or that came from a rural community that does not speak Spanish, but welcomes that grandmother that is there on her first trip chaperoning away from their community. And you see these bonds that take us right back to, yes, we want to affirm each of our identities, but in our essence, there's such goodness and good intentions that you see in the Gear Up community.
I'm glad you shared that because you're intentionally building a culture of inclusion with the parents at the Gear Up community, which are thousands of educational leaders across the country that serve these 500,000 students, because that is fed out into the field. That is part of the intentional culture creation that is unique for a large federally funded grant agency. So the initial impetus of Gear Up was to prepare young people, marginalized kids, for college. And now it's shifting college and career. And structurally, a lot of the Gear Up grants are housed in universities and community colleges, which it should be. But as we move into this career readiness field, we're talking about other partnerships with corporate and nonprofit and preparing kids for the world of work. How is Gear Up navigating that?
There's so many examples, and I can start, for instance, with the great work that you've been leading. But it really takes having to almost dissect the community that you're a part of to really unpack what are the resources available in that community. And so an academic term that we have used is community mapping, really understanding the resources. There are communities affiliated with Gear Up that when they have done that same exercise, they discovered that maybe they are in such a small rural area of the United States that their partnerships may not look like those of Silicon Valley, but they all of a sudden are able to get mechanics or mechanic shops that are willing to donate so that there is the tune-up that they can raffle when they have the silent auction. There's the supermarket that is a mom and pop supermarket in a small community that decided their contribution was to be able to put the signs across the aisle where you find your different products and that you're going to purchase in the colmado now have messages around college awareness and college aspiration, or around Gear Up specifically, so the students will learn about these services. There are examples like those, and then there are examples of grants that have been able to establish partnerships with Texas Instruments, with all of these great, different larger Fortune 500 and even broader. But when I'll come back to this impact around the career awareness and the career aspirations, I personally have seen how over and over we'll have people say, we want to prepare the student so that they are career ready. But my word of caution is remember, they have to be college ready and they need to at least have the aspiration and the yearning and the knowledge and skills to maximize their high school and be ready to go to college. And so that career piece, as long as it's happening in alignment with, it's all thumbs up. But we have to be careful that throughout the country, there are spaces where we are still distinguishing. You, Betty, you are Latina. You should go to beauty school and consider opening a beauty shop. Not you, Betty, could go to get your associate's degree in business administration and then go and proceed with that career that you may be interested in. So how do we make sure that all of our students are ready? But you're right, there's so many different types of partnerships that we can develop. But we must begin by understanding the community that we're at and the people that we serve.
It is about navigating a very complex world, and that's what Gear Up is there for, right? And we're really, really appreciative of the work that you guys have done. And you talk about servant leaders, Betty. You guys are all amazing servant leaders. In the 1 or 2 minutes we have left, I want to just ask, at this critical juncture for the country and for the future of young people, why is Gear Up important to the entire country, not just to the 500,000 marginalized students that they serve, but why should the rest of the country care about Gear Up?
Superintendent Matsuda, I hope the rest of the country is going to care because the needs in our communities, whether we are in Southern Florida or Southern California, are so vast. Gear Up is able to serve our students, but it feels often that we're a drop in the bucket. We have to grow this into a movement. We truly need to go from serving the 500,000 students to serving millions of students simultaneously. And it goes back to the broader needs of our entire country. In Puerto Rico, we say that if the United States has a cold, we have the flu. And that is true in so many communities throughout the United States. We see these pockets of innovation. We see great work happening everywhere, but the need is extraordinary. And we must grow Gear Up so that every student that needs the support is able to receive it.
Well, on behalf not only of our 27,000 students and their families, and our board of trustees, but really across the country, we're so grateful that your Gear Up exists and flourishes, and we will hear more, I'm sure, Betty, from you and Alex in the coming months. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.